Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We are back with our it's already the sixth episode of our live stream or video on demand, however you consume it, with tenant-to-tenant migration. And if someone would have told me this 6 months ago to have a series that long for just tenant-to-tenant migration, I would say, no, you're just kidding me. But yes, before we start into this session for today, I would like to give a short shoot out to Ruud, our guest for today, because of our special topic about devices. We are really happy to have Ruud in our call. And Ruud, would you like to start with the introduction?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. I'm Ruud Gijsbers, Ruud Gijsbers Gademakers, working for Avanade as a modern workplace technologist. And I'm mainly focusing on tenant-to-tenant migrations, and with those tenant-to-tenant migrations also on the endpoints mainly. So that will be Intune, Endpoint Manager, Azure AD joint, Hybrid AD joint, you name it, I've seen it. And yeah, therefore, thanks for having me.
We are really happy to have you here. This is a special topic. Thomas, you're the next one.
Yeah, hi guys again. So it's me, Thomas. I'm also with Avanade. I'm the solution architect for tenant-to-tenant or cross-tenant migrations, with all the focus on the technology up to or down to the user introduction section, which most likely is Michael topics. Lucky talking today about another one where the user is actually physically attached to, as long as he's not using glue.
And now for our next really hard topics, Raphael.
Hello, sixth time talking about compliance. This is so wonderful. I love you, my guys, my friends. And now, yeah, my name is Raphael Kölner. I'm CEO of Köln Service and of a law company. And I love to talk about compliance and all the stuff around from information protection to data retention, all of this. I'm also a concerned DPO. So on both sides, consultants and DPO. And yeah, I love to talk about it. And back to Michael.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just here to sit down, relax, and enjoy the show, and sometimes talk about user adoption and change management. I'm a CEO, managing partner actually, of a small company about Microsoft Teams, user adoption, change management, project management. And yeah, I'm with Microsoft since quite a while, so I have seen different things, but usually on a single tenant. And sometimes just with the user adoption part, I have some experience with multi-tenants. But actually, that's not reflecting all the knowledge we already have in our previous sessions. And we will see in the next one or two, at least one topic is still open, the adoption part. So I'm really looking forward to this one. Not sure about Power Platform, to be honest, because Power Platform, the short notice on this is it's not working at all. You have to export. And so I'm not sure if it's really worth to have an hour session about this, but maybe we will merge together the different topics. But let me point you to a very, very special session. In 4 weeks, we will have a Q&A session. And we are looking for your questions. If you have anything, put it in the comments wherever you consume it. Put it in this form. You may have some special questions. You may want to have these as answers during this live stream, and it's device related. Don't hesitate to put your questions into this, and we will answer these questions, hopefully. Otherwise, we will come back with the answer. But I can make the promise we will do. Always be baldy.
No question unanswered.
So that's the plan. But for today, we will talk about devices. And devices, already had a quick chat with Reed before. I thought it's already complicated when you migrate devices from one domain to another domain. You may have a merger and acquisition over there. I cannot imagine what's going on when you have let's talk about devices. The different types of devices, maybe. Let's start maybe with this one. Is this a good point?
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, first looking at Windows devices, you have the opportunity to add a hybrid AD join them. So they'll join to your local Active Directory and your Azure Active Directory. Basically, that's the least wanted option. But on the other hand, for tenant-to-tenant migrations and user interference, it might be even the best option. I'll come back to that later. You have only Azure AD joined. Well, in a tenant-to-tenant migration, if you only have Azure AD joined and you want to go to another tenant, then it's basically wiping and reloading the device and enter it to the new tenant. Then, well, you have an option if it's System Center managed, Configuration Manager managed. You can have it co-managed between Configuration Manager and Intune. And then you can also have it managed by Intune itself, standalone. And yeah, basically those are then, you can have the Azure AD joint managed by Intune. You can hybrid Azure AD joint managed by Intune, but you can also have them managed by Configuration Manager. So basically there are a lot of different flavors for the devices. And with each flavor, you also have different well, things to consider when you do a tenant-to-tenant migration. And then, yeah, there's also still the Mac devices, Mac OS devices, which I personally don't have that many experience with. But those are less, those have less issues than the Windows devices, because there are less flavors for Mac OS devices.
Maybe if I just put some pressure on it. We have forgotten one part. We have also mobile devices, right? iOS and Android, not to forget. So just making it complicated. And that's actually what we always experienced in a cross-tenant migration. There is all these kind of flavors Ruud actually mentioned at the moment. Thing is, we not only have the device itself, but we have also the user profile. And everyone knows it. If you just log on with a different user, and probably if you're in another tenant, you are a different user from the logic perspective, which means you also have the user profile. So it's not only the machine, you have also the user profiles, which means like it's now a wedge between both what we have to take care during a migration. And beside of this, and that's the most complicated part beside of the technology, the device and the user himself, or the user services attached to him, need to be migrated at the same time. Most likely, if you say you kick in anyhow in the evening, a migration, you also need to ensure that on the morning the device is actually also migrated. Else you create the same migration, only looking a little different, but twice. And that means for planning, user batch plannings, now it kicks everything in which is related to the required physical presence, not only of the device, but the physical presence of a human. And if the user isn't, or maybe is on sick leave, is on PTO, is on whatever else, and he can't actually work with the device, or the device is even not online, so you can't actually migrate anything. If you do a scheduled, or maybe a scheduled migration, so to speak, and say you trigger the migration, soon that laptop comes online, you let the user stop working for hours, most likely. And beside of that, also one part to be said at the beginning, there is no such thing like 100% success in device migrations. depending on how long they run, there is a failure rate where a device needs to be reinstalled. And that leads us to a lot of possibilities, but all are painful.
Yeah, definitely. And then, well, if you talk about user profiles, then that's where I want to mention that the hybrid AD join is most likely the least interfering with the end user, because you can disconnect the device from the old tenant, and then it is still AD joined. So the user profile on the device is still the same, and then you only need to reconnect it to the new tenant and reconfigure Outlook, OneDrive, and Teams, for example. So that's the least interruptive one for the end users. But yeah, that's.
But how is the user involved during this process? Is there anything the user have to do? I fear yes.
Yes, and well, at the current tenant-to-tenant migration, we just created a group policy which, with a script, which removes all the references to the old tenant and removes all the old profiles from Outlook, from OneDrive, from Teams. And after that will trigger when you first log in after the migration. It will remove everything. It will remove the connection to Azure AD. Then it will restart the machine, and then they need to sign in to their machine again. And at that point, they need to reconfigure Outlook. If that's not automatically reconfigured, they need to reconnect to Teams and reconnect to OneDrive. But yeah, that's basically it. Those are things that are normally handled by end users. They know how to do that, and it takes them about 5 minutes maximum, and then they're ready to go with the new email, Teams, and OneDrive environment.
Absolutely. If the, so to speak, the reference to the old
If it works.
Yeah.
But
if it works, and for me, I have a thesis in this discussion. Device is only one signal for the user, since, for example, information protection label is another signal, and retention is another one, and mailbox is another signal. So for me, it's very interesting, and this is a question also for Ruth, for our guest. And the question also I get from my customers also, which part or which signals we have to migrate together. Is it we put together the device and information security with endpoint, defender, security, information protection label together, or identity, then device, then labeling? And because everything of these has different challenges. And we talked about it. And now we are at the device part. And for example, I see the challenge as one of the examples. If you want to switch your iPhone, you need to restart and reinstall, and then start with a new profile from the new company, from the new tenant, and then start with all of your things. So you have something to do for user adoption together. And now you have the challenge. Can you something put or migrate together with the device?
That's a good question.
Yeah. We always have your good questions.
Yeah. I know.
Or is it better separately? So separately, device, labeling, retention, migrate the files, whatever.
Yeah, well, you can do devices and office workloads together, like Exchange, Teams, OneDrive, and well, labeling is indeed a special, again, a specialty where you have restrictions if it's with encryption or not.
Yeah.
So I would definitely take that one separately, aside from the devices. And yeah, I think that that's the best way to handle that.
Maybe let me also get in, because this is, I know where, I guess I know where you're coming from, Raphael. The thing is,
Yeah.
actually you need to see it as an environment. So, and the environment is the data or the tenant services, and is the device itself. And within these domains, you have security. That's the easiest way on how to see it. If you are moving a file with labels or even with encryption into another tenant, it will all work until that moment where you decommission the source tenant. At that moment, nothing works anymore, because then it cannot actually access the keys for unencrypting the documents. Therefore, you need to have a project in itself before you actually, not before you move the data, but before you start accessing the data, which means you need to have that project ready for relabeling, including unencryption of a document and re-encrypting a document. And then there is a possibility that is hyper complex, and I guess that you could talk even, or maybe we can make an 8th stream or live session by just only talking about AEP and handling multiple keys. But there is, so to speak, very simple set that is simpler to talk about rather than doing it. But you can extract the key from the source tenant and bring it into the target tenant. Then at least it stays something. If that's compliant or not, it's a complete different topic, I guess. But it's not therefore attached to the device. That's a pre-work, so to speak. If the pre-work is done, then again it falls all together, and then we need to see what we do on the device itself. Soon it comes online again. It has at least access into both tenants. And then it could also apply certain parts for labeling, depending on how the migration strategy on labels and encryption looks like. Luckily, that is not depending on the client.
So, Ruud, you were talking about the best case. I heard that. For the worst case, let me guess. The worst case is you have a on-premises managed hybrid joint device, or maybe what was the other one I thought about? Yeah, no, I don't think that's complicated. An autopilot device should be easy, I think.
Well, you should think that, but first you need to remove the device from autopilot in the source environment.
Okay.
And then you need to import the device into the target environment, and then you can do the autopilot part. So there are several steps attached to it, which you need to take into account. So it looks pretty easy just from one autopilot to the other, but you first need to remove it from the source and then add it to the target, and then you can do the deployment. So
does that have any impact for the users?
Yeah, they need to, well, the devices will be reconfigured, well, reinstalled basically.
Just a review. Sorry, it was not precisely. Just removing the device from the old autopilot environment. Does that have any effects for the users?
No, as long as the device is still running and doesn't need to be reconfigured, it doesn't have any impact on the device. So it's something that you can do up front. But when it's removed from autopilot, you cannot, of course, you cannot do a re-autopilot of that device anymore.
Makes
but
sense.
you can remove them up front, and then also up front add the information to the target tenant already. And then at some point, you need to trigger a new autopilot from the device, or a reinstall basically from the device, and then it will, during the first out of the box experience, it will connect to Microsoft, and then it will see that it's connected to the new tenant, and from there it will retrieve the autopilot information and the autopilot profiles, and then it will just configure it like the target environment is configured. And looking at the on-prem part which you mentioned, there is a option within Configuration Manager to do what is it called? Autopilot for existing devices, and then it will trigger a task sequence to connect it to autopilot. And as far as I know, you can also connect it then to another tenant, because you need to upload the offline autopilot file, which is basically a JSON file. You need to upload that to the task sequence in Configuration Manager. And if that points to the new tenant, then it will automatically also be attached to the new tenant.
Okay.
Let's, so to speak, make it a bit complicated. Let me summarize it again. We can have it in the source Azure Active Directory only.
Yeah.
That could be something where you have two options. Either the target part wants to have it in Azure AD, or they want to have it in their on-premise AD and then hybrid. That are this option for solution one. Solution two is the client is only in the target AD with no connect to Azure AD, at least not for the client. And then they can also have a couple of scenarios, like they only want to have it from AD to AD, which then applies to the same logic as we did maybe 20, 30 years ago. It can be to the AD and then hybrid joined, or it can be directly Azure AD joined, which is the complete different path. Now I come to the most complex thing. You have an AD hybrid joint device, which means like now it can have the same scenario. So that could be either only, so the device can stay in the source AD and will be only reconnected to the other Azure AD. It can be only in Azure AD, but it can also be from AD to AD migration, and then it can be hybrid joined, and all the paths looks different, and every path has a complete different, I guess, different approach, user experience, and sequence, and pros and cons. And then it applies on how it's managed, actually. So that means we have two tasks. We have where's the client, how it's managed.
Yeah, indeed.
And this is always a nightmare.
Yeah.
Basically,
and if you also want to have the least interruption for the end user, then it really gets complicated, because tools like the user state migration tool from Configuration Manager does not work with Azure AD joint devices. Active Directory migration tool does not work with hybrid joint and with Azure AD joint, because they're not joined to Active Directory. So you got a lot of challenges with mostly with the user profiles, and a large majority of that can be at least you can make it better when you use known folder move from OneDrive, where you just use the documents and the downloads and those folders which are already saved to OneDrive, so that if you do the tenant-to-tenant migration, the data from that part of the profile will also be migrated together with the OneDrive resources. And then if they sign in again with the new identity, then those folders will also be there or will be synchronized to the local device. So the profile part will be pretty much the same. And then it's mostly on well, the look and feel of your desktop and shortcuts you had and things like that, where you need to take into consideration shortcuts to old file locations and such.
That would actually lead me to a question to Ruud and Raphael. Wouldn't it be the best if clients will never ever, so Windows clients we are talking, will never ever be attached to any AD or AAD and just managed from the cloud? So like bring your own device and then you apply even security on it. I'm looking on Raphael at the moment. So I don't know. I think for me personally, sometimes I do not see any advantage of an AD on premises or Azure AD joint device. I simply can't see it.
So the short answer is it's also related to the way you work. If you work remotely pretty much the whole time, then it doesn't make sense. If you work in buildings on specific company locations, then you may have some local connections and benefits. But some legacy devices actually, or legacy services, connections, servers.
Yeah, there's a big misconception, I think, because most people think that when your device is Azure AD joined, you're not able to connect to your mapping, your drive mappings, you're not able to connect to your printers anymore. But that's not the case. If you configure your Azure Active Directory correctly connected to AD with Azure AD Connect sync, then you can also make use of Azure Kerberos, which basically uses Kerberos authentication to also authenticate to your local resources like file shares, like printers. So, yeah, there's
I have one.
Yeah.
For example, if you want to trust in a shared channel, you have the option to trust the Azure joint device of another company. There are some of these trust configurations. You need the Azure joint or Azure Connect device, for example. And in this area, for example, B2B direct or direct channel, you need every compliance policy you have. You need to take it and use it because there are only 3. So yeah, that can be a reason. But on the other side, for me, Thomas, the question is more: do we need an Azure AD joint device or not? On the other side, why we need a virtual Citrix or Azure desktop for working with. I have 6 Azure desktops I need to work with. Why? Because it's regulated companies, so we need it. And so the most are working with Citrix, Windows 365, Azure Virtual Desktop, or other virtual desktops. And they said, okay, this is the old view on security. How I take care because it's my environment, it's my device, it's my virtual desktop. And on the other side, tenant-to-tenant migration on virtual desktop, that is a very interesting device. Because for me, Ruud, and please say something against it if it's not right, you migrate only the profile. You don't migrate the system, you don't migrate the VM, you only migrate the profile. So why not working only in Windows 365? Or why you need an Azure AD joint device? The same on 2 ways. It's a very good discussion. It's a discussion we opened every time we opened this discussion in tenant-to-tenant migration. But it's not a discussion on tenant-to-tenant migration. It's more a discussion on the results and what you need.
Yeah, well, basically all Windows 365 or Azure Virtual Desktop devices are also either Azure AD joined or hybrid AD joined. So at some point they need to be connected to the new tenant. So it's not only the profile that needs to be migrated, and from a security perspective, the device needs to be connected to either Azure AD or hybrid Azure AD to be an identity in Azure Active Directory, so you can also use it with your conditional access policies. And if the device is not connected to either it's not hybrid joined or Azure AD joined, and it's connected to nothing, basically workgroup, then you cannot, well, it's not seen as an identity within your organization, and you will not be able to validate if it confirms to your standards, your compliance policies, and your configuration policies. So then you would always need to see that as an external device within your conditional access policies. And
we also got the question about enterprise state roaming and known folder redirection.
Yeah, that will definitely help. The known folder redirection is what I mentioned before, where your documents and your downloads and your desktop will be saved on OneDrive, and if you use it in both environments, then it will reconnect it to your OneDrive, and you will have the same experience. Enterprise state roaming, I'm not sure of if that's something that can be migrated along. But so I don't know. Something to look into.
Yeah, that's why always something pop up as we see in the clients. This is just, this area is already, I would sometimes say, more complex and complicated and requires more knowledge than the entire other cross-tenant migration, because there are so many different scenarios where we need to take care about that makes it really difficult. And actually it is, since 30 years, always underestimated. That means when we did it with NT 4.0, so we know 1969, yes, 1996. I'm not that old. Yeah, really, you're missing. But even there, it was the same part, and it has not changed. It's actually not true. It has changed. It has changed to a much more worse and complicated scenario, because former we had only 2 ADs, and you need to do some re-echoing. That's it. Today, you need to know what you want to achieve. The reason behind is, that's why I always say, you can restrict, or you have access policies possible on just user logins as well. So you do not need to always restrict the device. If you make the security planning a little bit more complicated, you can actually get rid of this device problematic. And then there is always the question of restricting applications, yes or no, on a device. But since, or correct me, but I think it's since Windows 7, there are some, or I forgot the name, there are some kind of technologies implemented to segregate memory and storage-wise applications on Windows devices, and that's even further improved in Windows 11 and 10, or 10 and 11. That means I still don't grasp the thing for what or why every customer, as it some I can accept, but every customer overcomplicates desktops. Let me say what I did in Asia when I was working there. I did it very simple. I said, you can do with your laptop whatever you want. I don't care. That if you just step in my door and tell me I have a problem, I only click the button and you have a fresh PC. That is simple. So that's the only thing, and everything else was backup, everything was there. And that was not with cloud. So it just simply works. And since we have all application, all data, everything in the cloud, and it can be honestly very strongly protected, there is nothing which can get lost. I agree if we talk about other services, but what service stays on premises? If someone has a file server or SharePoint server on premise, yeah, good night. Okay, then you still live 15 years ago in the past. So get rid of it. Then what else stays? These are isolated applications. If you see it on the Microsoft side, you might use database servers. That's one part. That is a different application. So that means, see, you can even move it into Azure. Most likely that is not that complicated to migrate. And then you have other third-party applications. And why you want to choose a third-party application where your laptop is the weakest point, where you need to make a laptop that safe to run this application. Just get rid of this application. Get another.
Because sometimes it's something like SAP, something you're not get rid of as fast as you think. But I know there are. But just give me a second. Just give me a second. I know this is a lame statement from my side, because you can use different authentications and trust levels with single sign-on, even on SAP, and also can use multiple ways to ensure you are authenticated. Also, if you have I wouldn't say ADFS in the cloud. I'm not sure about the right service name, but you can put it, the authentication level, also in the cloud and use it for your on-premises authentication.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. But this is something that most companies are afraid of, and they want to use an old on-premises security level for this.
SAP is a very good example. I like this so much. SAP is a visual front end. It is not an application like where you have data collecting towards your client. It's a visual application. And then I just lift this thing next to my head here. It's a mobile phone. That means if I want to extract data, and that works with everything, so labeling, encryption, whatever, if I take a picture, I take a picture. That means then work in a physical room where no device is, or maybe mobile phone or other things are there. So that means I can never ever understand companies who overcomplicate things which can be broken that easy. They restrict printings, everything, but they cannot restrict it from making screenshots with a third part or an external device. And that's why I always say, if there is a weak spot, let's talk about the weak spot to make the migration.
The point is, you don't make thousands of pictures in just a second by your phone. So the data loss rate is the risk. Raphael is killing me, I think, but it's pretty low.
I make 60 pictures per second with my iPhone. 60.
Yes, of course. But SAP is so slow, you cannot get any data or enough data to get that's other story.
And no, but this is actually what I meant. But it's not that SAP client is caching each and everything on your device as a physical accessible file. And that's why I'm thinking about when we talk about the migration and see the complexity behind. I always emphasize, always the same arguments I have with each and every customer. It's the same. No, we stay with what we have. You need to migrate it that way. So that means, to me, it makes sense before you touch the devices and make the same mistake again. Think, give yourself 2 or 4 weeks. Think if there's a different concept which could make it in the future easier. That's the only thing actually I say.
Okay.
So it's I know, I mean, everyone knows me. I always take some extreme counterpart arguments or sides as well. But I think it makes sometimes always sense to at least talk about it. But in the end, there is one single good reason. Then yes. That's something to think about.
So, yeah.
This crucial access database, access 97. Anyway, sorry, Raphael, for the interruption.
No, or fine. That's every time. And if we have now talking about device, tenant-to-tenant migration, whatever, every time we come, and Thomas, you summarize it a little bit in your last statement, please think and keep it simple. Don't do it too complicated. It's for every migration, for every work, for every administration, for every user, Michael. Or so for me, I think the next stream session is Microsoft 365 administration. Take it easy or whatever. Because if you make it more complicated, you get in trouble. And that's the same what we are talking about, starting with Microsoft Teams. All of you remember the question from our customers and also from our companies. They asked us, okay, can we have 100 different access level in one team? He should see, the other should write, but he should see only the subfolder and he should only see the main folder and whatever. And no, one structure, one easy step. Don't change the default too much, and be happy. And be happy also for migration. So at the end, and Ruth, and we have these open questions with enterprise state roaming. Out of my perspective, it's restart the service in the new tenant and migrate the profiles into the new enterprise roaming state. So for me, it's a little bit the same service like the old Windows profile service.
Okay.
So very easy. Windows profile service like is the profile service for Azure. I'm using it too, but I don't migrate it. We restart the service.
Okay.
Yeah. So we that's my last experience. We restart the service. We don't migrate. That's was easier.
Yeah.
And at the end, we don't migrate the service because the background picture is another one for another company. The profile, the system, the edge favorites, and all of this are other ones. So we said, okay, we don't migrate the old ones. We restart with a new setting. So we don't migrate enterprise state, the profiles itself. We only migrate the known folder, so the OneDrive folder, desktop folder, and then we restart the service and said, okay, here your old one. We restart the service. Please organize your data itself. That's a little bit our discussion. Hopefully, you see our discussion about SharePoint and OneDrive migration. You have the same here.
Yeah.
Where we had a hard discussion about migrate OneDrive or not. Out of regulatory, the firma brought the company. They get all the data, so migrate OneDrive.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't aware of the restart of that of the enterprise state roaming possibility, but that's a good one. And then Defender for Endpoint needs an enrolled device, right? Up until recently, it did, but I'm not sure if it's already out of preview. But at least it is in public preview that you don't need a enrolled device anymore to deploy to Defender for Endpoint. So that's that's not required anymore.
Great.
But
it's good. Yeah, I like it. I have some devices here.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it's still an attention point indeed for your migration that the devices that are managed by Defender for Endpoint needs to be migrated to the new tenant as well. And well, basically the Defender for Endpoint already provides you with some scripts which can help you on deregister from the source tenant and then re-register in the target tenant. But that's at least something to consider.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we already touched this topic, but I'm not sure if we've covered everything. Mobile devices. It sounds like it was really easy because you just provide a new profile to the devices, and they can re-register or reconnect to the new tenant. Is it that easy, or is there some?
I wish.
Of course, I knew it was a tricky question.
Yeah, it depends on several things. If you do either MAM, so mobile application management, or in Intune it's called app protection policies, or you do full MDM. So if you do only app protection policies, it's just signing out of your application and signing back in with your identity, and then you will retrieve the information from the new tenant. If you have a full MDM managed device, then there are, again, several flavors. For example, if you have iOS devices, those can be connected to Apple Business Manager. And then you need to reconfigure Apple Business Manager to connect to the new tenant. And then it will basically be a factory reset of the device to connect it to the new tenant. If you're just using the company portal to connect your device to the tenant, then it's basically signing out of your company portal application and then signing back into the company portal with the new credentials, and then it will indeed retrieve the settings from the new tenant. And same goes for Android. You have, for example, Samsung Knox, which can be connected to, Android Enterprise, Samsung Knox, which you can have connected to your Intune environment, and then it would also need to be reconnected to the new tenant, and then basically also a factory reset is required. And then we haven't talked about third-party MDM flavors yet. If there's no Intune involved, then that's also those tools need to be reconnected to the new environment. Either go for Intune or stay with the current management solution and connect that to the new tenant. Again, there is, as far as I know, will also be a factory reset if it's fully managed from that tool.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that probably depends on the tool you're using.
Which makes fun if you have private data.
Yeah, but that's then that's indeed, there are several different solutions you could use for that. I would configure the mobile devices different for bring your own devices than for fully corporate owned devices. The really corporate owned devices will be in Apple Business Manager if it's iOS, or in Samsung Knox or some other solution from the vendor. You have Android. And for Android, for example, you will use the Android Enterprise with Work profile, where you really segregate your personal and your work data. And then it is just a matter of signing out of your company portal. Then the company data gets removed. Your private data stays on the device, and then logging into the company portal again with the new credentials. And then your company data will be in a separate container on your device. So for bring your own devices, there are other solutions which you will probably configure within Intune so that you don't have the issues when you migrate to another tenant. And also, if something goes wrong on your company part, that you don't necessarily need to factory reset your device on every error you get, so that the personal part stays personal and doesn't get affected when there are issues. And that option is also available on iOS.
Wow. I always love this topic.
So let me summarize. The easiest way to have a device migration during the tenant-to-tenant migration is format everything, clean everything, remove it, bring it back to the factory reset, and then reinstall. Because all the data is already in the cloud, there should be not an issue.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's easy.
Yeah.
No one will likes it, but that's easy.
Yeah.
What was the wrong part,
I
Raphael?
would
Please
add
help me.
one point. It's so easy if you have a tenant-to-tenant migration into Europe. If you migrate outside of Europe to China, to Russia, to a company from Turkey with the KKK, then you have to be aware of data privacy and all of the data transfer regulations. If you transfer only in Europe and say data is in cloud and we transfer, all fine. If not, we have this discussion in one of our last tenant-to-tenant migration. We have to look at data protection, data privacy, intergroup agreement. We have to look if the IT consulting company is allowed to move. That's also one. Thomas has this question. This was a question in my mind, and I ask it now every time. And these things. So, if you are on the data privacy and regulatory way, fine. It's only a cloud-to-cloud migration.
Yeah.
Yeah, for different regions, you also have the multi-geo license you can request at Microsoft. That will probably not solve all the regulation or regulatory requirements, but will at least help in the discussions.
Only compliance issue with multi-geo. You can have a multi-geo today in Europe, so a main tenant in Europe. This is a huge step. Before you have only US. Now it's possible to EU, but it's not a part of EU boundary and all of these compliance functionality and agreements. So if you decide to multi-geo, you're outside of these agreements. Currently, hopefully not in the future, but currently you are out.
Yeah. So, but I wanted to quickly come back on the client side, just with a couple of things, because I love this discussion, and I bite my tongue already, because then we overrun the meeting again. But again, also the question actually Michael raised, and yes, I can in parts agree. Very often, it could go along with even a hardware replacement for clients. That could be either the company where you migrate to has a different vendor strategy or anything like this. If that's the case, go this way, because that makes it less hassle-free. It's more organizational, less technical. And that's always a part. Also, we called it, I think those who worked on Exchange 5.5 and 2000, there was something like called the leapfrog, so der Laubfrosch-Methode, I'm auch just in German, which means like you collect 100 devices or you have 100 new devices, you deploy, you send out, you get 100 back, you deploy, and you migrate like this. By the way, that extends your migration time windows massively, grace period and all this stuff, but at least it works for the client, so for the user himself, very, very straightforward and easy. Or if possible, they can come in the office wherever possible, and you do this replacement. That would be definitely one part. I also always recommend to take massively into consideration, because here it comes from one project. Let me give you some overview here. It was hybrid joined, massively controlled up to certain parts where I said, wow, I have no clue why. But at the end, they also said all their 9,000 users, a few ones still worked in the office, needed to be migrated remotely. And that's the ultimate nightmare because you need to have them in different time zones. They need to be online and so on and so on. Furthermore, since it was AD joined on premises, you must migrate even over a VPN connection. Not a problem. But for example, this client here said, our security requirements is a user certificate based VPN. Yeah, that is actually something you can experience that if you are going into the forest, you climb a tree, sit on a branch, take your saw, and then you saw on the tree or bench where you are sitting on. Because soon you migrate, you are in another PKI. So that means also here again, also the path where you migrate through can be a pain. I always want to say in the behind, but that means also see very early at the beginning what it's really required. Simplify the source environment, simplify. As we always say, clear up data. That was also something where I said, don't migrate 1 billion files of log files nobody need, because it takes you one to 2 years before those are migrated. Also to the client, same valid. Go there, simplify, make things happen that it can be smooth. You spare millions. Don't be stubborn like we receive. I mean, we are Germans, luckily not, because now I experienced that in other countries it can go easier. But in Germany, or everyone say it was done in the past like this, it must stay in the future like that. No, you can, but then you pay millions, really millions, and your users start hating you. That is actually a statement on mine to what we've experienced on those clients, and all the make it a little easier solution didn't work through. Like replacing devices, for example, just do a rolling migration, whatever, migrate less people, ask some under their own free will if they want to come into the office. All those things is handleable. But sticking to what it is, don't move. Like we say, run with your head through a wall. In this migration, sure, you can do if you have a very big path.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds like a good summarize, or summarize is the wrong word. That's maybe a good description how you can handle that. Yes, I would say we stop this at this time. And once again, thank you very much for your time and your expertise, Ruud.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. I would like to point one more time to the questionnaire where you can put in your questions for our Q&A session for about 4 weeks. The next session will be about user adoption and the tricky parts when we have the different topics. Maybe not every topic, because we already had different discussions about the different topics and how you can handle user adoption in these specific places and in these different scenarios. But the general idea about the way how we can handle user adoption during this complicated, difficult time for users. And therefore, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the sessions. Give us your questions. See you in 2 weeks with user adoption, and have a nice evening, good morning, good night, wherever you are. Thank you.
Let's fuck it. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.